coming to you live from the heart of the free state of New Hampshire. This is The Independence with Carla Gericke. And now, here's your host, Carla Gericke.
Hi guys, and welcome back to The Independence. Today, of course, is Wednesday, and thank you so much for joining me. Many of you are watching this, of course, on YouTube, Facebook, and X streaming live, but also streaming into your homes right here in Manchester with our public access television station. So thank you for joining me again. What is coming up in today's show? Well, first of all, New Hampshire is number one for another thing, and I will tell you for what in a little bit. The housing crunch looks like it is taking a dive, so we will talk about that briefly. I, of course, need to remind you, you have to, please go get your Porcupine Day tickets for the 10th annual Porcupine Day coming up next Tuesday, so in less than a week, over at Bedford's Murphy's. I'll be honest, I just bought my tickets this morning myself, so I get it, but really, guys, if everyone could get out there and make that happen, that will just help a little bit with the planning. So appreciate that. Go to fsp.org and look for Porcupine Day or Pork Day X. The X, of course, being for the 10th annual event. The main thrust of today's show is going to be to make suggestions for a solution to the lack of due process is probably the nicest way I can talk about what's happening out there in Minnesota. But since I went to the State House on Friday to testify on HB 1441 here in New Hampshire, which of course would put together a study committee to study the question of whether New Hampshire could peacefully secede from the Union, my suggestion for Minnesota is likewise. Maybe it's just time for a national divorce. And if not that, then at least time for states to really reclaim their states' rights and start to put the federal government, which is behaving in various unconstitutional manners, regardless of whose team is in power. There are armed forces on the streets of America executing American citizens, not the boogeyman immigrants, American citizens on camera. And you all are just sitting around and yeah. You should be worried about the growth of the federal government and the growth of what we are ushering in here while you are being distracted and manipulated by algorithms. So I'm going to start with this quote, which is from George Orwell. And I have seen so many influencers out there, from Tim Pool through to J.P. Sears to, everyone's got a take, and most of them are really bad because of this dysregulation with immigrants being the boogeyman, and I'll get into that in a second. But here is the quote from George Orwell in 1984. It was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. Yeah, and I'm looking at all of you. You know who you are. So can we do better? Libertarians are supposed to be the people who are principled in situations, and we should be calling this out. The fact that you can see left, right, literally flipping, where now the right is anti-gun and saying things like, well, you shouldn't bring a gun to a protest, when 2 years ago they were like, hey, here we are with our guns at protests. And the whole flip around, here is the point. There is a standing army on the streets of America shooting and killing American citizens on camera, and we should all be outraged about that. So Number one in New Hampshire for, drum roll please, health. So that seems exciting. We were just ranked number one in the nation for overall health. And this is according to America's Health Rankings. Our state leads the country with the lowest food insecurity, the lowest homicide rates. I mean, I find it comical sometimes when I'm talking to people with my day job with real estate, when I have to explain to people there really isn't bad areas in New Hampshire. And then sometimes I try and illustrate that by saying, did you know there's been one murder in Concord, in our state's capital city, in the past decade, which really does put things in context. Of course, why is New Hampshire so safe? Probably because we have really well-armed and polite people around. All right. We are also the highest in high school completion rate in the nation and the top performers in exercise and fruit and vegetable consumption. So these are the strong social and economic factors that drive better health outcomes here in the Granite State. And this is proof that Granite State communities, families, and values are working. We should be proud that we've built this sort of health thing. My secret theory, of course, is that we're healthy because we all have so much snow to move around. And I do think the sort of rugged lifestyle and the rugged climate here in New Hampshire does lend itself to more health as well. Next, I wanted to mention that New Hampshire's we're building homes at the fastest pace that we've done it in the past 2 decades. And there was an article that came out today or yesterday, January 27th, from Michael Graham, where he talks about, and this is at NH Journal, at nhjournal.com, report shows New Hampshire building homes at fastest pace in nearly 2 decades. And so according to a new report from the Department of Business and Economic Affairs, municipalities issued permits in 2024 for the construction of 5,822 housing units, the highest annual total since 2005. Now, that number is really just 6,000, so we'll round it up to 6,000. So 6,000 new permits, 6,000 new homes. Assuming all permitted units were completed in 2025, then the Granite State has now added 25,000, let's round it up, 26,000 housing units since 2020. So perhaps now we can fit in all the Free Staters that I hope are going to move here to New Hampshire. Why? Not only because we're the healthiest state, but of course because we are a state with very low taxes and a pro-freedom culture. What is a pro-freedom culture? In my esteem, it is a live and let live culture, but of course it is in our motto, it is in our state motto, live free or die, which I like to update and add a little happiness there at the end, which is live free and thrive. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes here, guys. So the first thing I want to knock on or talk about here a little bit is the HB 1441. So on Friday afternoon, I went up to the new building or the building they're renting, which I actually kind of like, right? The rooms are a little bigger. I think there's aircon, there's a little more space for the hearings. So how it works in New Hampshire, of course, is we submit all the bills. Every bill gets a hearing, depending where you are on the calendar. Sometimes sort of indicates if leadership supports it or what. So I would say if you're going up there on a Friday afternoon after lunch, your bill is probably not super popular. And I get it. But this bill would establish a study committee to explore the peaceful separation of New Hampshire from the Union. This is something I have believed in since I moved to New Hampshire, and my reason, as I said on Dr. Phil Primetime, is fundamentally the federal government is corrupt, immoral, and bankrupt. Now, whether it rises to a technical Ponzi scheme, the AI and I were arguing about that this morning, but it was willing to concede that if not a definitional Ponzi scheme, probably metaphorically and figuratively fairly close to that. Now, I was surprised when I testified in front of the Veterans Committee, so that's already stacked as well, right? Now you're bringing an emotional component to the whole thing. And the chairman actually did, for several of the people who testified, there were 4 or 5 people who testified in favor of the bill, in favor of starting to study the question. This is not a question of secession. This is a question of, hey, if we were to do this thing, what would it look like? So as I said in my testimony, as my grandmother said, my Oma said when I was growing up, proper preparation prevents poor performance. And we should be analyzing the best path forward for Granite Staters and citizens of New Hampshire because, in case you didn't notice, the world's kind of wild and wacky out there. And whether you agree with George Orwell, whether you agree with me, whether you agree with George Carlin, whether you think we're heading into 1984, whether you think we're already in it, I can assure you, I don't see things getting better on the federal level. And you know, when I was doing my show prep this morning, I went down a little side quest rabbit hole that had to do with, hey, how many agencies in America have their own court system? Which, you know, I'm a recovering lawyer, don't hold it against me, was actually kind of interesting because for a while now I've been saying one of the problems is we keep writing more and more laws, we have more and more regulations, and we haven't really scaled up or sized up the judicial system, right? Which means, of course, one, if you're encouraged to take a plea on the criminal side. Your civil cases now take forever. I have, in my lifetime in America, watched it go from a functioning legal system to, you know, a banana republic kind of system where it takes you years. It takes like 9 months now just to get a basic order out of the courts, and that's here in New Hampshire. Much worse on the federal level. By way of example, I was arrested in 2014, and my civil case at the First Circuit in Boston only came out in 2014. And we, of course, had to wait 8 or 9 months for that order to come out. And if you're curious about that story, the Where incident, I'm calling it Where It Began. I am getting many of the people who were involved that evening to come on my podcast, The Independence After Hours, which I record around 7 p.m. on Friday nights. Last week, I had my lawyer, Seth Hipple, from Hipple and Martin and Concord on to kind of talk about his perspective. This Friday, I'll have the other gentleman who was arrested the same evening as I was to talk about sort of his experience there. But the filming, that case, right, my case, Gericke versus Began et al., out of Weir, New Hampshire, formed and has been cited in over 70 other court cases. It is a landmark case that made it legal, not made it legal, affirmed the right, your constitutional right under the First Amendment, to film public officials in the execution, terrible verb, of their public duties. So my court case is part of the reason that we can see the footage coming out of Minnesota, where again, one woman was murdered and then called a effing B by the ICE agents, and her last name was Good. And then this fiasco from last week, where it was a Second Amendment person actually helping someone else up, who then got executed on camera. So, you know, I had always believed that evidentially, if we had video footage, then we would be able to create a more agreeable sort of world, because we could all look at something and be like, oh, that's what happened. But here's the part I didn't factor in. Here are 10 prominent ways that Americans are being manipulated by everyone. I mean, honestly, guys, it's by everyone. So I'm going to run through them really quickly, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why Minnesota should secede and why it is time for national divorce. All right, so here are 10 ways you are being manipulated. 1, algorithmic emotional hijacking on social media. Platforms feed users content that triggers outrage, fear, and tribal anger. Oh, I'm going to go online and I'm going to tweet that even though I've always been pro-gun, now I'm going to be like, oh, the dude didn't have a permit, so, I don't know, I guess he deserved to, No. That is you being manipulated or looking at your in-group or your tribe and then being like, oh, I got to say what everyone else is saying because Kash Patel's saying this, so I guess I got to say this too, right? So that tribal anger is there to make someone money. And it sorts you into ideological camps and it keeps you agitated rather than informed. Now, I will tell you, I've taken such a step away from social media that I actually have not watched the videos because to me, everyone you're entitled to your opinion, I'm entitled to my opinion, but in the end, as you know, that's just your opinion, man, right? So someone should have a trial because someone was like, oh, well, wouldn't you give Kyle Rittenhouse, would you have like blah, 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 and I'm like, the dude at least had a trial. Here's my issue. This is how the federal government works. They're like, we do bad stuff. If we get caught, we're like, oh, my bad. And then they don't reform because tell me what has been reformed in the past 50 years on a federal level. About zero. And they investigate themselves and then find themselves not wanting. So I'm going to seed this into the universe. Hopefully someone somewhere will maybe run with this for their own idea. I think a very valuable nonprofit organization, could probably be nationwide, would be to take every single justified killing as ruled by the government when a government agent has murdered a citizen, then and then we should just summarize them and explain that this is the case law. And this means that if it's justified for a state agent to murder someone that way, then of course it is justified for all of us, unless you are arguing, as the state does, by the way, that no, we should be held, the government should be held to lower standards because we get qualified immunity. Now, at its heart, what is qualified immunity? Qualified immunity is the government's get-out-of-jail-free card. And what that get-out-of-jail-free card says, at its very core, at its essence, is the following. You and I are told ignorance of the law is no excuse, except if you're an enforcer of the law, the Popo, Border Patrol, ICE baby, the IRS. Let me see if I can remember all the other secret courts. I don't know, there's some FISA stuff, right? So all the agencies, so they say, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Unless you are the enforcer of the law, then it is an absolute defense. Now, if you're sitting there and going, gee, Carla, that sounds kind of batty, that's a little bonkers. Yes, it is. So where should we start with our analysis of something like Minnesota? We should start with the following. Is there a dead person? Do we know who did it? Is someone going to be held accountable? And beyond that, I think the entire internet should just hush up or go in your state and start to work for real state rights because we are in trouble in this country. The federal government is too big. It is bankrupt and it is immoral. And politics as a machine has now become so entrenched, and they have literally ensnared your attention and your consciousness, and people are just being whipped around in this bizarre and crazy fashion. I actually, although I don't think I'm going to have time to get into this properly, but, ICE was established in 2003 as part of the DHS, and it was in response to 9/11, and it was the vibe of the terrorists are coming, right? And all you really need to know is whenever someone's talking about the deep state, these are the departments that you should be worried about. So algorithmic emotional hijacking on social media. 2, coordinated influencers and paid narrative campaigns. And this veers from left to right, and you gotta watch who you are listening to. 3, illusions of political choice. So this is the bipartisan elite capture. So both parties are heavily influenced by the same donors. They're playing the same game. It's a shell game, and you don't know where the P is. Well, you're probably the P. So they offer these superficial differences while they support the same policies on things like surveillance, on how our money works, on why our money is being diluted, on spending and corporate priorities. This is how we end up with, plastic in everyone. All right, 4, there's disinformation and deep fake amplification. We're going to be at a stage where you're not going to be able to know or understand or believe anything with your own eyes, which means what? You need to actually get back into real life, into real communities with real humans. I know we're not real humans here right now, but get out, go meet people, take someone for dinner, go take a walk, and get away from these screens. All right, there's government and NGO disinformation countermeasures as narrative control. So agencies and partnered organizations flag, suppress, and promote content under the guise of fighting misinformation. If you went through COVID, you know this for a fact. Are often targeting dissenting views like mine. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and basically suppress any voices of dissent. 6, there is fear-based perpetual crisis framing. This is where you're just constantly alarmed. You're kind of like, you don't know why, but you just keep scrolling. That's why. Put your screen down. All right. 7, controlled opposition and outrage merchants. Figures who appear to challenge the system are often amplified or funded to channel energy to safe, non-disruptive directions, keeping people engaged in endless debate without threatening real power structures. Now, if you like to get your jollies on the internet, just arguing about who's right about stuff, you might want to wonder if you're one of them. All right, 8, 9, and 10. 8, narrowed Overton window and identity capture. So what is this? This means like you're only allowed to have this much of an opinion. Carla, you're not allowed to have an opinion on secession because that is outside the Overton window. I know it is. I did it on purpose because you know why? It means everything has to move that way. So everyone always says that's just too far. And to you, I say it's too far now, but maybe in 20 years, I'm going to look like a genius. All right, 9, economic and scarcity manipulation. This is like the #1 argument with the immigrants. It is literally xenophobia. It is the easiest way to manipulate you, to hijack your emotions, and to make you angry about things, is when people tell you your jobs or your benefits are being taken by someone else, while forgetting that the government runs a monetary Ponzi scheme, which means none of our Social Security is going to be there, guys. 10, overconfidence in personal immunity. Yeah, I'm looking right at you. What does this mean? It means you think you're too smart to be manipulated. But for everyone who thinks that, I suggest go do a little deep dive on the whole arc of immigration propaganda in this country from 94 to now. And what you will learn is they've literally flipped the terms. Democrats used to stand for closed borders and deporting people. In fact, actually under Obama, deported the most people. That was a Clinton started platform. And basically it's a shell game where they are using your emotions to make you look at these tiny slivers of things while what? While we are building a standing army that many of you are cheering on. Now, I believe we can do better. How can we do better? Let's divide into smaller places, smaller groups. People can get together according to their values. The Minnesotans, if they want big welfare government, they could go run those programs, see how that works out for them. Here in New Hampshire, we're more low taxes, pro-freedom kind of values and culture. We could have a different thing here. Of course, that was the original thinking of the founders, right? Was that we would be laboratories of experiments, or will be experiments, and then we could figure out between the states which ones had the best ideas, and then kind of use that across the nation. But then what happened? FDR, the federal government got too big, war, we go off the gold standard. Now they can just print money. And now we are in this situation where our federal debt is now over 38 trillion. I think it's $38.4 trillion. I put in a bill for New Hampshire to secede 2 years ago, where I put in a triggering event of $40 trillion because I thought that would give us 10 years to work on the issue. So we're almost there, and we're 2 years from that. So my point is the problems are accelerating, and we need to start to think about real solutions. Now, the real solution I truly believe in is a national divorce. Why? Because sometimes mommy and daddy don't like each other anymore. And the best thing you can do is to stop saying, man, I think we can make this work, and to realize you have irreconcilable differences, and then to figure out a way to make it a peaceful divorce. So sadly, I don't have time for all the rest of the show prep, but I clearly had some things to say today. Join me on Friday night live on YouTube, The Independence After Hours, where we will be talking about my landmark First Circuit First Amendment lawsuit, which made it legal to be able to document these government actions on the streets of America. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. If you like what I'm doing, please share my content. And you can always reach me at carla@carlagericke.com. Thanks, guys. I wish you peace, love, and understanding.